Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I'm very happy to have a special guest today, Andy Hoffman. I've met Andy in 2010, and I have followed his career and followed his writings, and I think I may have been the first person to interview him about Bitcoin in 2012 in San Diego, California, when it was really kind of just starting to make some news because I think it hit $50. And Andy has started a new blog called cryptogoldcentral.com. It's a blog that I recommend everybody go to right now. It is a paid members blog, and I'd highly recommend you subscribe to it. It's one of those blogs that you should check every morning with your cup of coffee or every evening. And Andy does the most in-depth research possible. And it's fresh, it's cutting edge. I remember just a week or two ago when everybody was panicking about these ICOs in China, and Andy was like the only guy. He emailed me, I think me and a dozen people, and he emailed us and guys, they just banned all of Bitcoin's competitors. How is this bad for Bitcoin? And I'm like, yeah, good point. So Andy's that guy. He comes up with fresh stuff because he's always well researched and just a very smart guy. He's worked on Wall Street. He worked in the gold bullion industry for a while. He worked in the gold mining sector for a while. And he's the guy you want to know. And the blog is cryptogoldcentral.com. I cannot highly recommend it more. Andy Hoffman, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Yes, thank you. Our relationship does go back for some time, and it's been very fruitful in many ways. And I remember that day, that interview I think it was April 2012 in San Diego at a conference. And it was, the price had gone up, so you were asking me about it. It's still on YouTube. And I think my answer back then was, it's intriguing. I don't get it. I'm skeptical of it, but it's intriguing and I'm going to watch it. And here I am 7 years later. And while I still am very bullish on gold, Bitcoin has become my passion, and it's become the focal point of my new blog, cryptogoldcentral.com. For the first time in my life, I'm now my own boss. And as you said, I am, I'm bringing the same level of quality to what I did in the past, except now I can do multiple topics. So instead of one big article, I'm doing many articles on many different topics, and in a very timely fashion. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, Andy, so let's just, the blog, so anybody who's listened to you or read your work in the past, what can subscribers expect if they subscribe to the blog?
It was funny because and again, it costs just $225 for an entire year of content. And that includes all the articles I wrote and all the podcasts and my Twitter feed. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to get for that. And when I had initially, because I just launched it last week, and when I initially wrote the FAQ and the subscription page, my wife was telling me you have to be conservative about what you promised. And I said, well, I don't think that's really a problem because I produce more than just about anyone. But even I have been surprised because in just 3 days, I think I produced close to 30 blog posts atop all the Twitter feeds. I now have done 3 or 4 podcasts. So I'm going to work my butt off. And the topics are so diverse. I mean, they're always related to Bitcoin and gold. I'd say probably 2/3 are related more to Bitcoin because it's just a lot more incremental things to teach people and as opposed to gold, where most of the factors are out there on the table already. And you're going to go on there several times a day and see a lot of content. And I'm going to be out there in the public talking about the markets like I'm doing today. And it's fun. For the first time, I can pick and choose what and when I talk about it. It's great.
Certainly the two most exciting spaces to be right now, when you look at either shorting the stupidity in the central banks by owning gold or owning crypto, which could be the future, and the blockchain itself. I mean, certainly cryptogoldcentral.com, a better domain than the runner-up that you had, 100-year Austrian bonds.com. So anyway, well, hey, let's talk about cryptos, gold, and Austrian bonds. First off, let's start with the cryptos. Since you've been following them and since I've been following them, it really is annoying. I don't check it daily like I'm sure you do, but I do check it when I see a headline that says Bitcoin's crashing. And it's funny because I bought some Bitcoins as recently as July, I think for like $2,100. And I look at it and last week it was Bitcoin's crashing. Bitcoin was at 48 and 41 and 38 and 4,000. And I keep checking it. And every time I read these headlines, it's Bitcoin's crashing. I check Bitcoin and I'm like, it's not crashing. I'm really freaking happy that it's doubled my money since July and, quadrupled it since some purchases in 2012. But anyway, this Bitcoin crashing thing, is it just nonstop? I mean, are you noticing the same thing? It's every day the Bitcoin's crashing. That's the only headline. It's obviously it's tied in right with the same kind of crap that we've dealt with gold.
Right. Well, there's a lot of ways I'm going to answer this. First of all, it's funny because, as you know, when you interview me when I was at Miles Franklin, almost everything you ask, I can say, "Oh yeah, I just wrote about that. I had an article." Right. So, you mentioned my alternate was the Austrian bond thing, and it's funny. I will read this one. Yes, this is private content, but it's not exactly one of the more detailed one. I did one yesterday that's called. Where is it? The most obvious trade in history. And I'm basically saying, what would you invest in, Bitcoin, gold, or the 100-year Austrian bond being issued at 2.1%? As far as, Bitcoin dying, I did 3 articles this morning: the Bitcoin roller coaster, the prohibition effect, and Bitcoin is dead for the 160th time, because there's a website called 99 Bitcoins, which writes down every time someone, official puts out an article that Bitcoin is dead. In this case, Jamie Dimon, of all people, says that Bitcoin is a fraud worse than tulips. So again, look, in the gold world, the whole point is that the powers that be are fighting it to the death. And we've spent not just the 15 years I've been in it, but going back to the 60s, going back to the gold standard being reneged on in 1971 with the propaganda saying it's a barbarous relic and that it's dead and no one needs it. And yet the price in absolute terms is 3 times higher than when I got into it 15 years ago. And if you look at any other currency other than the dollar, where the manipulation is focused, the average currency, gold, is around its all-time high right now. And I'm not just talking about third world countries. You talk about Japan or India or Canada or Australia. So, you're going to continue to see the propaganda trying to steer you out of the unfavorable markets and into the desirable ones. So they'll tell you stocks are cheap when they're the most objectively expensive that they've ever been. And the same with bonds, that you need to own bonds because inflation is low or high. I'm not sure. In both cases, you're supposed to own them, apparently. But as for Bitcoin, look, my new thesis, what I've been talking about for the last few months at Miles Franklin, what I'm really talking about now, is that Bitcoin is far more dangerous to governments than gold. I shouldn't say ever was, but that certainly that gold is now, because in this new digital age, and now that Bitcoin's technology has shown that you can have a decentralized currency that the government, it's very, very difficult for them to do anything about, other than, they're shooting their blanks, okay, we'll close some exchanges, we'll impose some regulations. But the fact is that adoption is exploding despite all of this. And a year from now, the adoption will be a lot higher. And a year from now, adoption will be much higher. And keep in mind, now that SegWit was just activated, the scaling is going to go off the charts. So the new applications are going to they won't be able to keep up with the old applications, let alone when it gets fungibility and becomes anonymous sometime in the next, let's say, year or two. And then they literally can't track anything. So you're going to see more and more propaganda. You're going to see, I thought it was perfect because I said the government would start switching its manipulative focus gradually, not in a minute, from gold to Bitcoin. And sure enough, Jamie Dimon, of all people, the symbol of gold manipulation, is out there saying, attacking Bitcoin, which I think is a real inflectionary point. So yes, Bitcoin is getting crushed back to 3,800, which, by the way, the first time we ever saw 3,800 was 4 weeks ago. So I wouldn't worry too much, especially if you're in, as most people are, at much lower levels, because I wrote again in this Bitcoin roller coaster today, I showed how this is just commonplace. The price surges, it crashes, surges to new highs. So just hold on, or hodl, as they say. And remember, there's another crypto dividend that's probably coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks, when B Gold tries to do what B Cash did 2 months ago. So just relax. Bitcoin is going to be a lot harder to manipulate than gold. And it's going to be the future of money. It's just a matter of time.
Okay, Andy, I was in Houston yesterday at a blockchain conference, and this ties in. You were an oil analyst in the early 2000s, and just for listeners who should know this. So Andy knows this sector, and Andy, I don't know if I share this with you, but I was at a conference yesterday. It was blockchain for the oil and gas industry, but it wasn't just any oil and gas companies that showed up. I listened to the guy who's in charge of the blockchain adoption for ExxonMobil, BHP, Halliburton, Chevron, Microsoft's data scientist was there. And two things I want to note, and I want to get your comments on. Number one, all these people in these very large corporations, not only were they pushing towards blockchain, but the people in charge of their conversion and research, they were Bitcoin enthusiasts. That's number one. Number two, and I want to get your comment on this about Ethereum, was that I know you don't recommend Ethereum, at least it's from what I recall. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all of these large corporations, they were going to use Ethereum's platform. So I just wanted two things. First off, are you observing the same thing, that the Bitcoin enthusiasts are all over the Fortune 500 companies at this point, including NASDAQ? I was the TMX, which is charging the TSX. Those guys were there yesterday. They actually did they were showing how the TSX is going to be doing trades with blockchain in the future, as well as NASDAQ. And then secondly, Ethereum. What are your current thoughts on that? Because whether currency or not, that platform is being used heavily by some of the big corporations.
Wow. Okay. So you're asking me things that I really going to have some fun talking about. Because you bring back, I was an oil field service analyst from 1996 through 2005. First on the buy side, then I worked at a company in New Orleans, and I spent the last 6 years, 99 to 2005, at Solomon Smith Barney in New York, covering the oil field service sector as an equity analyst. And yeah, those were my boys: Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker Hughes, drilling companies. I was actually on the Deepwater Horizon, the rig that blew up in the Gulf a few years ago, at its christening. So I have a long history. I have 3 lives. I have the oil life, I have the gold life, and now I have the crypto life. But anyway, when I joined Solomon Smith Barney, I joined in May of 1999. So I got there right at the top of the bubble, of the dot-com bubble. And right at the end, just as I started, we had our investment bankers. For anyone who thinks equity research is even the slightest bit objective, getting us in their office and saying, you have to write every single, as they call it, vertical, every single, whether it's oil or retail or packaging, you have to write a report about how B2B is going to change this. How there's going to be oil field internet companies, there's going to be retail internet companies, there's going to be everything internet, there's going to be pets.com, all this stuff. And in fact, is that a lot of these things, like Webvan, by the way, is exactly what Amazon Direct is. So some of these things were just before their time, even though they were mocked back then. I spent my whole time writing writing a report called Bubba to Bubba, as in B2B, about how there's going to be all these oil field service companies that are going to use the internet to make a lot of money. And we were in the process of about to take a bunch of these public, almost the equivalent of ICOs, like ridiculous valuations for ridiculous concepts. And just as that report came out, and I was getting all these people coming to see me speak to talk about this stuff at the top of the dot-com boom, it was February 2000, the dot-com bubble crashed, and all those ideas went out the window, and all the IPOs out the window, and we went back to mainstream oil. So there is an aspect to all this that's repeating, of the blockchain coming in and changing everything. Because yes, the blockchain is conducive to a lot of things, but it's not going to change every business in the same way. Some things, like money, it will completely transform the entire world in the form of Bitcoin and other things. But other things, you're going to see a lot of hype and a lot of greedy bankers and venture capitalists and investors trying to capitalize on what they hope will be a bubble, or they don't realize is a bubble. So that's the other thing going on, which brings me to Ethereum. And look, I've said all along that there's so few liquid crypto assets in a sector that's already seeing, but is going to see a lot more, as in trillions more of investment flowing from the legacy sector. So long as Ethereum doesn't blow itself up with its myriad headwinds, it has lots. It's decentralized. It's got competition. Its technology has issues. But, assuming it doesn't completely blow itself up, it's going to do great. And more importantly, while Bitcoin is the standard old style, just does money, that's all it does, the blockchain can be used, like with Ethereum, to do all these exotic things and get all the bankers all excited. And that's exactly what's going on. Ethereum has become the platform of choice, although people don't realize that now that we have SegWit, Bitcoin can do the same thing. And there are other competitors like Tezos that are coming on that'll do the same thing. Even B Gold, that's going to be the spin-off of Bitcoin, says they're going to do the same thing. So the point is that Ethereum is more to me a tech company than a cryptocurrency. And by the way, you know who's one of the founding members of the Ethereum Alliance? JP Morgan. So Jamie Dimon says Bitcoin is a fraud, and yet the one that's far more closer to a fraud, Ethereum, is not. But anyway, my point is there's two aspects of the whole blockchain cryptocurrency revolution. Some of them are for the better of man, and some of them are going to be incredible game-changing technologies and financing techniques. And the other side of it is going to be the dot-com bubble side, which you have to be wary of.
Sure. I get the question all the time on how to invest in the after you own some Bitcoin. Are there any other investments that you've seen? Whether it's there are most of these businesses are private. There really aren't too many publicly traded Bitcoin companies, and honestly, 99% of them are scams anyway. Like the cannabis industry. But so, what about that? Is there any other outside of Bitcoin and Litecoin? Any other suggestions or businesses or private businesses that you've reviewed that you like?
No, I guess as you know, I'm a huge fan of Litecoin. Litecoin truly is Bitcoin light, especially now that it has its own SegWit. And, Charlie Lee doesn't run the company, but he's because it's decentralized, but he certainly has worked hard to put in a position to have some game changing use cases. So I have a position in that, and I believe very, very strongly in it. But the rest of them are, you're kind of making the illusion. I have to think about it too. They're companies. I think most of the ICOs are more the equivalent of tech companies than they are cryptos. And they are mostly centralized, and they mostly require outside financing, often by the ICO route, which is going to undergo some incredible amounts of regulatory scrutiny, as we're seeing. And so, no, I have no real interest. As far as you say, are there any publicly traded Bitcoin? No, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any way to invest in a Bitcoin company other than through the private capital or ICO route. So that's definitely not something I'm interested in, but we'll see how that plays out in time. Obviously, if the industry grows like I expected, it's going to become more mainstream and you'll have more opportunities, but I don't think there's any of those right now.
So the volatility in Bitcoin, the media tries to trump that up. We've talked about that a little bit, but when someone's buying Bitcoin, let's just take it back to the basics, because you told people just buy it, hold on to it, just sit tight. Ultimately, where do you see Bitcoin going in 5 years from now, in 10 years from now? What will Bitcoin be?
Right. Well, it's so funny because one of the main one of the main attacks you get on Bitcoin is it's volatile, and particularly from the precious metal industry. Look, I found, and it's pretty obvious, that the most vicious kind of clueless attacks on Bitcoin have come from the precious metal industry, because unlike myself and a very few others, they don't realize that they're not competitors, they're allies. And believe me, precious metal people, you want Bitcoin to go up, because if Bitcoin fails and the government can overrun it, it's not going to be good for the gold industry, which has not had an easy time handling the government manipulation on its own. And conversely, I found that some of the most clueless, uninformed gold comments have come from the Bitcoin industry, things that you wouldn't believe, because I've heard everything, and I've never heard things more inane than what I've heard from some of the people in this community. So, but coming from gold community, they say, oh, it's volatile. It can't be a currency. And my point is, first of all, I don't care if something is volatile if it goes up. Gold's volatile. Problem is, it hasn't gone up much lately, and that's the problem. People don't care about volatility. They care about, ultimately, are you making money? And yes, if you bought Bitcoin at 5,000, and probably no more than a handful of people on the planet did, that's upsetting. But the vast majority of people bought it somewhere under $3,800, and they're very happy. And by the way, part of the volatility is because, of course, it's thin. There's very little Bitcoin out there. There's only about 16 million that were ever mined, and probably a couple of million of those were lost. And the vast majority of the rest is in strong hands, hodlers. So, and there's not a lot of paper derivative markets. So it's really a pretty thin market. And that's why it moves so fast, but mostly it moves up. And, the thing is, the only thing that's really going to cure that volatility is adoption. And with adoption comes higher prices, because, look, picking a number, let's say Bitcoin was $40,000 a coin. Well, that volatility would go down dramatically. It just wouldn't be rising and falling by 5 or 10% a day if that many people owned it. And that is what I believe is the end game for cryptocurrency. I think it's, I I've written many, many articles. I wrote, one of them was called The Ultimate Monetary Death Cross. I think it's going to be a lot sooner than most people think when crypto starts to usurp fiat currency because the world just realizes it's better. And it's kind of like I've always said to people in the precious metal space, I said, if you really want to understand the difference, what makes gold and silver so valuable, hold in one hand like a quarter, which feels like a feather, and on the other hand, hold a gold or silver coin, which is really heavy and shiny. And if you know the history of what it took to get that out of the ground, how scarce it is. Well, the same thing goes for cryptocurrency because if you just try to do a bank wire or any kind of transaction, let alone over a weekend or with any kind of complexity involved, the time and the cost and the inefficiency is unbelievable. Meanwhile, if you send someone a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Litecoin, it literally is instantaneous, any time of the day, any amount at a cost of almost nothing. And now that we have SegWit, the cost will go down even more because they're going to scale it. Plus, there's plenty of other cryptocurrencies that have tiny costs, and it's just really amazing. And when you see what the governments are doing, just continually destroying, it's like I see this morning this headline. Because I remember when Trump got in office, they're like, "Oh, look, he finally got it right. He hired this budget director, Mulvaney, who's really, really conservative. He's a real budget hawk. He's going to, really balance the budget." So I see this morning it says Mulvaney proposes tax proposal and revenue neutrality, not even on our list of cares. Like this is what they're doing to fiat currencies right now, where the most conservative people are just saying, "Yeah, screw it, just ramp the debt up. We just passed 20 trillion, and we'll be on our way to 30 trillion." So I don't think it's going to be long until people realize just how amazing this technology is. And now that Bitcoin is gaining its strength, it's gaining its monetary property, and it's getting vile. It's past all this hard fork stuff, and people realize the network's not going to be broken. I think you're going to see you say 5 years down the line in this technology era, that's like 50 years. I think the world is going to be a different place, and it's going to be and cryptocurrency, particularly Bitcoin, is going to have a very large part of that game.
What about all the Bitcoins in cold storage in Lincoln's Head at Mount Rushmore? I'm just joking with you.
That's really good. That's really good. And again, that's the beauty of this, because even the best conspiracy theorists in the world can't do anything. The best that I've heard is, like the one that I left. I did the podcast with. You got people out there saying the government's going to control Bitcoin, which is so ridiculous because no one can control Bitcoin. There's no one out there. I mean, and especially government. Government can't do anything right. But even if you had the smartest government in the world, if Martians came down, or whoever the smartest races of aliens, they still can't control a decentralized network that goes throughout the entire world, especially one that's growing so rapidly and scaling so rapidly.
Well, yeah, and that leads me to the last question. Is I wanted to talk about China. Because that seems to be making the news the most. And just in your opinion, first off, if let's say China comes out with a law and it says no more Bitcoin, because I guess that's what everybody's expecting it to come out with, but you can't ban math, you can't ban code in computers. It's absurd. Maybe they can slow down the exchanges, but if you can, because everybody's just getting the headlines on what's going to happen with China, I want to know what your intelligent mind sees when you see these articles about China banning Bitcoin.
Well, first of all, again, I did a post a couple of days ago. It's called holylocalbitcoins.com, the single most telling graphic of Bitcoin adoption. And in it, you see, if you think the price of Bitcoin has gone parabolic, look at the adoption of localbitcoins.com, which is basically an anonymous over-the-counter Bitcoin trading platform, which is used worldwide. And believe me, it exploded in China. If you remember back in January, people forget this because the price was back at $1,000 back then compared to $5,000 a few weeks ago. The Chinese came in January and said, indefinitely, you are not allowed to withdraw Bitcoins from Chinese exchanges, which is essentially a capital control. It's basically banning Bitcoin because you can't have it. You can trade it, but you can't have it. So what happened was the trading in localbitcoins.com in China just went through the roof. You can't stop that. And that's exactly what you've seen now, even with the exchanges online around the world, including China. But now, if China did do that, and remember, China's got its National Congress convention next month, like the big once every 5-year thing. and Xi Jinping wants to get reappointed as the Communist Party secretary. So you have a lot of, it's kind of like, Trump and Clinton making ridiculous promises ahead of a campaign, like I'm going to build a wall to China and we're going to end poverty and all this stuff. It's the same thing. They're trying to look politically strong before this. But the fact is, if they actually tried to do this, localbitcoins.com would explode. Remember, the premiums at localbitcoins.com are extremely high. So it would be no different than, if there was a shortage, if you see a shortage in precious metals and all of a sudden it costs you 30 or 40 or 50% higher to buy it in these black markets or whatever you want to call them. That's exactly what would happen, because that's what it is. And of course, in many countries around the world, it's completely legal and governments favor it. In fact, in the third world, I think they'll probably voluntarily make it their national currency because it'll be the only thing that gives them stability. I mean, no one can print money in a third world country without it hyperinflating. So I think all it will do is look. Satoshi's vision, right, was that we have a peer-to-peer network, which is essentially local bitcoins. But of course, it gets financialized when the price goes up, and all of a sudden you have all these exchanges. But that's not what Bitcoin is all about. Ultimately, Bitcoin is going to work when it is more decentralized. So I expect all these governments are going to attack. As I said, like Don Quixote failing at windmills. The U.S. government will too. I mean, when Bitcoin gets big enough and people talk about it enough, and they're printing so much money that everyone is freaking out, they'll shut down Coinbase, they'll shut down Kraken, and they'll shut down whatever else they can shut down in this country. And what'll happen? People just go everywhere else, and and that's what the beauty of it is. So I believe that what you're seeing now with China, part of it is political posturing out of Congress, but part of it is the beginning salvos of what I called, I wrote an article called like China launched the fiat crypto wars, and you're going to see it for some time, and the cryptos are going to win. So if you're a hodler, just keep doing it and relax.
Yeah, I think for Westerners, especially Americans that are maybe speculating in this space, I think we're almost all speculators in this space. If you're in the 4.5% population of the United States globally, because I think I talked about this in our last interview. I've spoken to people who live in India and who live in China. This is not about speculating at all. This is necessity. They are under constant financial threat from their government, from capital controls, from banning cash, from devaluations, from absurd taxes, from outright theft. In the United States, the government is very efficient at stealing with inflation and all these fake taxes they give us. But everybody's happy. Everybody at least is they just go with the flow. But look, in some of these other countries, especially you go to the continent of Africa, where people don't even have bank accounts, but they have smartphones. This is not a speculation to these people. These people need Bitcoin, and I think that's the hardest thing for people like me. Sitting in an air conditioner house with a fridge full of food, to even consider that I need something. But no, and there are billions of people who need Bitcoin. And I think that's so hard for a lot of us Americans to understand.
Even in this country, there's plenty of use cases. If you were simply educated, think ways that it would make your life a lot easier and a lot cheaper. It would save you an incredible amount of money just on banking services alone. If people in this country had the motive to even look into these things and learn about them, but they, generally speaking, they don't, because we're a wealthier country, and more importantly, people are lazy and entitled because the government seems to print money to give them things when they don't have it. But like you said, most of the countries in the world, most of the countries in the world, this is a necessity. It's the first stable store of value that they've ever seen. Because let's face it, most people can't afford gold, but more importantly, most people can't get gold. There's very few places on earth where you can go to like a bullion dealer or a coin shop and get gold. It's not available in most places, and it's too expensive. Whereas Bitcoin, you can buy in any amount, and as long as you have a computer, you can find a way to do it. So that's what the beauty of it is. And look, I just did a show the other day. I did, my friend Adam Meister, I believe he's been on your show too, with this guy in Venezuela, Gabriel, and he's on the ground talking about exactly what you're saying. He said no one can even afford cash. It's too expensive. There's lots of food in Venezuela, he said, but no one could afford it. And one of the only ways you can afford it is by getting your hands on Bitcoin, which down there is very hard to do, but you can do it. And so there's many places around the world like that. And again, we're in, the big pink elephant in the room about why Bitcoin came to be and why it's going to is guaranteed to grow in strength and usage is because of this fiat currency hyperinflation. I mean, we are in, as I call it, the terminal malignant stage of history's largest, most destructive fiat Ponzi, and that will just keep going, and that will make people need Bitcoin more. So the future is as bright as can be. What we're seeing now is just typical Bitcoin roller coaster. And as I was pointing out today, if you look at all the giant smashes, I shouldn't even say smashes. In gold, it's a smash. In Bitcoin, it's just normal market movement because there's no like COMEX out there. Someone's secretly knocking the price down with derivatives. But, this is probably the first one that I can recall where there was no real dangerous FUD behind it. I mean, yes, the Chinese may close exchanges, but they've done that already. And I really don't care. That doesn't bother me as a Bitcoin holder. The only things that have bothered me is the prospect of Bitcoin itself being damaged. And that's what all the pre-SegWit, pre-hard fork era was about. Really, even the smartest people in Bitcoin worrying that the immutability of the 21 million cap and the very viability of Bitcoin from attacks of any kind was in question. I was terrified many times. That's why we made money holding it, because we had to endure that risk. But I don't worry about these. The upcoming hard forks, don't worry about it. In fact, I look forward to them. In fact, the SegWit 2X, I don't even think will happen. But if it did, I think people will laugh at it. And the Bitcoin Gold one, I think will be great. It'll be like Bcash, just free money. So I think now that that's out of the way, the immutability issue, especially because SegWit fixed kind of the last remaining security issues that people had, I have no worries at all. I'm not worried about the Chinese government. I'm certainly not worried about Jamie Dimon, what he has to say. So I think you're just going to see it, bottom somewhere around here, turn around. The next thing you know, we'll be in another phase of growth and interest. And what I think and I'll conclude by saying that what I believe 2018 is going to wind up being is not only the year of cryptocurrency adoption, where it really starts to spread, but the year professional marketing and Wall Street money comes in and venture capital. And all of a sudden, there's just trillions of dollars, or at least tens of billions of dollars of investment and professionalism and legitimizing going on. That's what's the really exciting prospect about. I mean, look, I'm the only blog in the sector right now, as far as I know. There'll be hundreds of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, hey, look, one thing I did take away from whether it was going to this conference recently or just speaking to the average person at the grocery store is you're an early adopter. I know Bitcoin is ran pretty high here, but in the bigger picture, this is nothing. This thing, it could go to $1 million. You can just keep moving the zeros. So, you're an early adopter. And then again, when I was listening to the people at Microsoft talk about using the blockchain to make things more efficient, or even the oil people were saying like some of these settlements or land transactions take 90 days. They could take like a day with the blockchain and, because of the trust factor. So you're still an early adopter. And I think more than ever, because of what's happening with the fiat bubble and the debt bubble, cryptogoldcentral.com, it's a site you need to check every day. Become a member. Again, Andy said $225 for a whole year.
And I have a 7-day money back guarantee. So you can actually try it for a week. You'll probably read like 50 articles in that week, and then you can cancel if you don't like it. And you will.
Absolutely. All right. cryptogoldcentral.com. Andy Hoffman, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Daniel.